During the summer of 2024, I traveled to the Eastern Shore of Virginia and I came across a cemetery, but I didn't know the significance of the cemetery until I finally found the time to read a book that I bought from a museum. Lays the body of Commodore Zedekiah Whaley, who participated in the final naval engagement during the American Revolutionary War. Privateering was running rampant in the Chesapeake Bay, and so the Maryland state government decided to do something about it. The Maryland Council of Safety passed the Defense of the Bay Act in October 1780, which allowed the governor of Maryland, Thomas Sam Lee, to have funds to create a Maryland Navy. Even though Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown October 1781, there was still fighting going on because a treaty hasn't been signed yet. Which leads us to the Battle of the Barges, which happened over a year later on November 30th, 1782, on the eastern shore of Virginia. So the Maryland Council of Safety selected Captain Zedekiah Whaley to command a small fleet flotilla to patrol the bay's waters to handle the loyalist privateering going on within the bay. He was ordered out to sea 3 times, but Captain Whaley, who was too busy resupplying his ships and waiting to rendezvous with the French fleet, which he would have used as reinforcements, but the Maryland Council of Safety was getting impatient with him, so out he went. By October 1782, there was no indication that the French fleet was around to support Captain Whaley. So Captain Whaley, he was alone basically with this small fleet. November 28th, 1782, Captain Whaley encountered Loyalist privateers Captain John Kidd, Joseph Wayland at Tangier Sound, Virginia, and being outnumbered by 6 British barges, Captain Whaley had to seek refuge on Onacott Creek in the eastern shore of Virginia. Captain Zedekiah Whaley, he sought backup from Lieutenant Colonel John Cropper of the Accomack County, Virginia militia, and John Cropper, he gathered 25 of his men to man the vessels, British vessels that Captain Whaley managed to capture a couple months prior. The next day, November 29th, Captain Whaley received intel that Captain Kidd was near me, close by, and so Captain Whaley, he got his fleet to sail out, but one of the captured British vessels ran aground, and so that ship was left behind, and some of the members of the crew got transferred to the remaining ships of Whaley's fleet. Lieutenant Colonel John Cropper, he was on one of the captured British vessels, but he moved over to Captain Whaley's flagship, the Protector, and so he was co-commander of the ship. November 30th, 1782, Captain Whaley and his fleet finally caught up to Captain Kidd at the Acacia Straits, and the Battle of the Barges began. The British opened fire, but their primary target was the Protector, Captain Whaley's flagship, because it was so far ahead of the Patriot forces. But the Patriot forces held their ground because of the 6 British barges, 2 of them backed away from the fight because they were just overwhelmed with the firepower of the Patriot side. But during this battle, on the Protector, gunpowder spilled on the deck, and before Captain Whaley had time to scream, "Wet the powder!" the gunpowder got ignited, and there was a huge explosion on board. 4 men died instantly from the explosion, and there were sailors jumping overboard the Protector to escape the flames. When the British fleet saw this, the British side, they got encouraged, and so the 2 British vessels that fled the battle came back and overpowered the Patriot forces, and so the Patriot side, they started backing away because here was fresh power coming on, leaving the Protector, Captain Whaley's ship, abandoned. Despite being surrounded by the British, Captain Whaley refused to surrender and he fought to the death because he received a fatal wound into the chest, and his first lieutenant, he got his arm blown off, but he continued fighting. But the second lieutenant, Joseph Handy, he also perished in the fight, leaving Lieutenant Colonel John Cropper of the Virginia militia in command of the vessel, but he had absolutely no maritime naval experience. Lieutenant Colonel John Cropper, he was also determined to fight to the death. And so when Captain Kidd's vessel, the Kidnapper, came and boarded the Protector, it was hand-to-hand combat, and John Cropper, he received a slash in the head from a saber, and well, he almost died because he was fighting two white men and a black man, but the black man he was fighting happened to be a slave from his father's household. And so when the black man recognized his former young master, this black man, he told his comrades, the two white men, to stop fighting. Interestingly, there was an Irishman fighting on the British side, and he also recognized John Cropper when this Irishman, he was a prisoner of war, and John Cropper showed compassion to him, and so he backed the black man, and it was enough to convince the fighting to die down a little bit. Captain Kidd took the survivors of the Protector onto his own vessel, the Kidnapper. A funny story in this situation is when Captain Whaley requested reinforcements from the Virginia State Militia, Major Sneed, he didn't have time to dress into his officer's uniform, and so he had to board one of the vessel's Patriot forces in his civilian clothes, but his subordinate, Captain Thomas Parker, was already in his officer's uniform. And so when Captain Kidd transferred all the survivors of the Protector onto his ship, the Kidnapper, he pushed aside Major Sneed, saying, "Step aside, make way for the captain," as he led Captain Thomas Parker to his cabin to dine with him. Captain Thomas Parker, he didn't want to give away his superior's identity away, and so the two men of the Patriot forces of the state militia, they just kept that pretense going on during the time of captivity. When it was time to seek terms, Lieutenant Colonel John Cropper and Captain John Kidd, they came to an agreement that John Cropper, he would take the survivors of both sides to the mainland Virginia to seek medical treatment if John Cropper would release the prisoners of the Jolly Tar, one of the British vessels that Captain Whaley captured back in November 15th, 1782. And the irony of this battle, the Battle of the Barges, it happened November 30th, 1782. And that was the day that the Treaty of Paris was being drafted to end the American Revolutionary War.